Viewers, assemble for the after-action review of Marvel Avengers. This game has been very tricky for me to review. I like the story and combat of the game, but on the other hand, I'm very disappointed with its glaring issues. It seems like the development team had a really great plan to make a solid single-player campaign experience featuring Earth's mightiest heroes. But then someone higher up than them on the corporate food chain came in and decided to gut the game and change it from being single-player focused to being multiplayer focused. This game's campaign emulates the first Titanfall, and I'll explain what I mean by that later on in the review. But this design decision, in my opinion, was very disappointing and holds this game back from fulfilling its true potential.
You are not worthy.
I am very satisfied with the combat in this game. Each character's kit is creatively designed around their individual characteristics. Each hero's play feels right. Thor and Hulk are heavy-hitting tanks. Iron Man flies around the battlefield attacking from range. Black Widow relies on dodges and mobility. Miss Marvel is a balance between dodges and sweeping area of effect strikes. And Captain America is the stalwart super soldier using his shield to both attack and defend, and double jumps to get around the battlefield. Each character has an intrinsic ability. This is the hero's special ability and is tied to a meter underneath the health bar. Thor truly is the mightiest Avenger, and you can definitely see that in this game. Thor's kit is designed around his hammer and his lightning. Thor's intrinsic ability, Odin Force, is activated by holding down R2. It makes him invulnerable and increases his damage. His intrinsic meter depletes as you use it and passively refills when not being used. Thor's L1 ability, Warrior's Fury, pushes the Odin Force beyond its normal limits, giving his allies invulnerability and summoning lightning that strikes enemies around him for a short duration. Thor's R1 ability, God Blast, summons tornadoes that suspend enemies in the air in front of him as you hold R1. Upon releasing R1, Thor unleashes a huge bolt of lightning, dealing massive damage in a cone in front of him. Thor's ultimate ability, that is activated by pressing L1 and R1 together, is Bifrost. Thor summons the Bifrost Bridge, which picks him up. The player is then able to select a location for Thor to be teleported to, and release a massive energy wave as he lands. Thor is the most versatile character in the game so far. He is built like a tank. Throwing his hammer is effective at range. He can fly, and it is pretty cool to pin enemies to walls with Mjolnir. For these reasons, he is my favorite character to play in the game. Iron Man is the quintessential ranged character of this game. His intrinsic energy meter is directly connected to his ranged attacks, which replace the normal heavy attack option. Mr. Stark can switch between repulsors, lasers, and rockets, and manually aims by holding L2 and hitting R2 to fire. Or you can just tap the heavy attack button, and he will automatically aim and fire at the enemy you are facing. Iron Man's L1 ability, Arc Overload, knocks enemies back, dealing a small amount of damage, and overcharges his intrinsic energy bar, which continually fills and increases the damage of his ranged attacks for a short duration. His R1 ability, Unibeam, fires off the Unibeam, which the player can control for the duration of the attack. Stark's ultimate ability summons the Hulkbuster armor, either around himself or on the ground at a select location. If the armor is placed on the ground, an ally may use the armor. The mobility of the character along with his diverse arsenal make him very fun to play. In fact, the most fun that I had in the campaign was when I played as Iron Man and battled against a giant robot deployed by AIM. the battle gave me the same feeling as the Avengers movies. You fly around the massive enemy, destroying its weak points with your different ranged armaments. It was cinematic, it was fun, and it was an experience that you just cannot get while playing the other characters, who are designed to be on the ground and up close and personal. The Hulk is the true tank of the game. He is the biggest one around, and he knows it. His intrinsic ability is similar to Thor's. As you hold down R2, it activates, increasing his damage output, giving his attacks lifesteal, and causing damage he takes to reduce his intrinsic meter rather than his health. Where Hulk and Thor's ability differ is that Hulk's intrinsic meter remains depleted while out of combat and is replenished by damaging enemies. Hulk's L1 ability is Bone Shaker. Hulk slams the ground, dealing damage to enemies around him. Hulk's R1 ability is Stranglehold. Hulk runs forward, grabs smaller enemies, and slams them into the ground. When this is done to larger enemies, Hulk jumps on them and punches them. Hulk's ultimate ability is Thunderclap. Hulk spreads his hands apart as he builds gamma radiation in his body and deals a small amount of damage to enemies around him. He then claps his hands together, releasing the energy built up and dealing massive damage to enemies at a short range in a cone around him. Hulk is a standard brawler character with little focus on anything other than melee combat. He does have a ranged attack, throwing giant rocks, but it, in my opinion, is much more fun to just pick up small enemies by holding down the light attack button and throwing them at their buddies. If you are looking to fulfill a power fantasy, you can definitely do it playing as the Hulk. He is ridiculously hard to kill and packs a punch that can shake the foundations of even the strongest enemies. Black Widow is the striker of the group. She is mobile and she hits hard. Her intrinsic ability passively increases her damage as she strikes enemies without being hit, and is not activated by the R2 button. The R2 button is instead tied to her grappling hook ability, allowing her to zip around the battlefield and from enemy to enemy. Her L1 ability, Veil of Shadows, turns her and her allies invisible for a short time. With her R1 ability, Widow's Bite, she launches an electrified bolt at an enemy, causing them damage and stunning them. Black Widow's ultimate, Power Surge, fuses her batons into a bow staff, significantly increasing the damage of her melee abilities. As in the movies, Black Widow doesn't have a massive health pool to survive, or super strength to take down bad guys, but it is fun to see her overcome her limitations as a not-so-average human and remain competitive in a group of superheroes.
Oh, not so easy as that.
Captain America is the anchor that can hold any team of superheroes steady through a storm. The OG Avenger is very well balanced between being a brute, a skilled fighter, an acrobat, and a ranged attacker. He doesn't take any crap, but he sure can take a hit. Cap's intrinsic ability has him raise his shield, blocking melee strikes and deflecting ranged attacks. His L1 ability, Rally Cry, marks surrounding enemies, causing them to take more damage. Allies that attack marked enemies gain health regeneration. His R1 ability, Steamroller, allows him to throw his shield and bounce it off of up to 5 enemies, causing huge damage and stunning them. Brooklyn Brawler, Cap's ultimate, sees him do a spinning jump into the air and slam his shield into the ground as he lands, dealing massive damage to enemies around him. This ability also buffs his attack and defense for a short duration. Steve Rogers is the super soldier. His unmatched skill in hand-to-hand combat and his surprising ability to bend the laws of physics when he throws his shield make this kid from Brooklyn a force not to be reckoned with. Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel, is the newcomer to the Avengers roster. The freshman crime fighter is a product of the events that took place on A-Day. She is able to stretch and grow her body parts much like the Fantastic Four's Mr. Fantastic. Her L1 ability is Healing Spirit. It fully refills her own willpower and slightly heals allies as well. With her R1 ability, Kamala sends a giant-handed palm strike forward, damaging all enemies in a line. Miss Marvel's ultimate ability, Embiggen, is where we begin to see her full potential as she grows to a giant size, buffing all of her attacks and refilling some of her willpower. Before getting her powers, Kamala Khan was an Avengers superfan. She was even a contender for an Avengers fan fiction writing contest. But now, Ms. Marvel stands toe-to-toe with the forces of evil right alongside her childhood heroes.
Aren't you gonna say the thing?
The implementation of intrinsic abilities was an ingenious and well-executed way for Crystal Dynamics to separate out each character's kits and make each hero feel unique in a special way as you play. I was also very happy with the way that the characters are balanced in the game. If you remember from my after-action review of the beta, I said that it felt like the game developers were trying to create a system in which the physically weaker heroes were able to stay competitive by using mobility and QTEs to deal damage. And this holds true for the full release of the game. While Captain America and Black Widow are not able to have the power of abilities such as God Blast, they are able to stun enemies and activate technical combos to bring down their foes. This gives the game a realistic way to explain how Natasha Romanoff, a human, would be able to bring down a robot that was able to pose a challenge to Thor, a god. Speaking of Thor, I want to thank Crystal Dynamics for not skimping on the juice when they designed the big guy. Thor and Hulk are more powerful than the other members of the team in the comic book lore, and they should feel that way in the game as well. This was done very well by the developers, with you being able to feel the power in every one of their strikes. But at the same time, these two heroes are not unstoppable and don't totally break away from the pack when it comes to actual combat prowess. Combat in this game does have one major setback, and if you've played even for just a short amount of time, you can probably guess what I'm about to say. Cooldowns. Each hero in this game feels so awesome to play, and the heroic abilities are a big part of that. But aside from the intrinsic abilities, the cooldowns are too long. What happened to me, and what I fear will happen to other players, is that I began to hold off on using my abilities and save them only for when I absolutely needed them, which is a shame. Now, to be fair, for Thor, Hulk, and Iron Man, who are my favorite characters to play, the long cooldowns didn't bother me so much because of how their intrinsic abilities work with their melee and ranged attacks. But for the other characters in the game, combat is just not as satisfying without being able to use their special abilities way more often. I do know that this issue is helped as you progress through each character's skill trees and also as you level up your gear. And while it is true that seasoned players with higher level gear may have much shorter cooldowns, it is a shame that lower level players and those that are really only going to play through the campaign have to contend with cooldowns that dampen their gaming experience. One last minor complaint that I do have about the combat in this game is the dodging system. While the dodging system in Marvel Avengers does mimic some great games like the Arkham series and Spider-Man for PS4, there is one thing that makes the dodge system here much less effective unnecessarily. You see, in the Arkham series, an indicator over the enemy's head would tell you to dodge. And in Spider-Man, an indicator over Spider-Man's head would tell you to dodge. The problem with Marvel Avengers' dodge system lies in the similarities between the two other games. In this game, the dodge indicator appears in the center of your enemy instead of above their head, and it is a circle instead of a bolt of lightning like in the Arkham series. I think that these two things make the indicator too inconspicuous and easy to miss, especially when you're in combat with as many enemies as you often are in this game. The game has a well-made progression system, with characters being able to unlock skills from 12 different skill trees that allow you to create a unique build for each hero depending on your particular combat focus. In multiplayer, no two players will have the same character built the same way. To be very clear, players will be able to unlock every skill for every character, but some skills in the later skill trees cannot be activated together, but can be switched as much as you like. This encourages players to experiment with different builds for each hero. The other half of the progression system of the game works well enough, but was quite controversial when the game first released. I, of course, am talking about the gear system. The gear system in the game works much like any other looter shooter in the gaming space today. You can collect different gear to equip into the 4 different gear slots of your characters. The red exotic gear is the best gear, gray colored gear is the worst, and green, blue, purple, and orange are in between. There are also 4 gear manufacturers in the game. Gear does not have to be made by one of these, but when it is, its stats will generally be as follows. Hammer Industries focuses on hand-to-hand combat. PIM Technologies focuses on damaging enemy weak points. Shield focuses on defense. And Stark Industries focuses on ranged combat. The controversy behind the gear system comes from the fact that while the gear does change the stats of your characters, it has no effect on their appearance. This was disappointing and did upset quite a few players, as they saw that while there are no loot boxes in the game, many of the cosmetics are bought with a paid currency, meaning that not only are players more limited in customizing their character's look, but also if they want to get the quote-unquote best skins, they would have to pay. For me, this was not much of a game killer, or really an issue at all, personally. It didn't bother me so much that the gear didn't change the minor details of a particular skin. But that's just my opinion and how I felt playing the game personally. I definitely do understand why people are upset about this. I do agree, and I do see that it creates a gap between what could have been and what is. Having said all of that, I do want to tell you that I personally did have a huge issue with the descriptive text of every single thing in this game. If you look at any of the skins, the emotes, and the takedowns in the game, none of them have a unique description. This makes the game feel cheap and generic. It especially is disappointing when you consider that the skins should probably have some type of lore written into their description. This was a wasted opportunity and was personally hugely disappointing. You can pull up a video on YouTube right now and listen to a guy rattle off 1 or 2 sentence descriptions of every Iron Man armor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Why couldn't they have done that with the skins in this game? This may seem like a small detail to you, but it's in the small details that the devil resides. And those small details make the difference between being a good game and being an excellent game. The last thing that I want to say before we get into the story of this game is that level design was odd, to say the least. This is what I was talking about when I said in the beginning of the review that the game emulated the first Titanfall. The campaign of the game uses the same maps that you will play through in multiplayer. The story missions most often start you off on one side of what is a multiplayer map, with multiple optional side objectives around the map. These side objectives include chests to open, inhuman allies to free, and special enemies to battle. You battle enemies that spawn in as you move toward either the side objectives or your main objective on the opposite side of the map. Once you reach the main objective marker, you will often find a building that you go into. This serves as a type of mini dungeon that you fight through to finish up the mission. This is also where all of the story elements of the level takes place. All of this sounds fine on paper, but because of the open nature of the level design, it feels more grindy than anything else. You are just moving from objective marker to objective marker, fighting enemies along the way before finally moving forward with the story of the mission. This setup would be fine for a multiplayer mission, but in my opinion, cheapens the single-player experience. The game's level designs seem to be trying to be both linear and open world, but it just isn't able to bring out the strength of either style. The levels are open, but it's not a fully open world, so there isn't really anything to explore. The missions are linear, but the levels aren't designed with the character of other linear games, and nothing is creatively hidden throughout the map. Everything is marked. It probably would have been a good decision to only use the open levels in multiplayer, and have most of the levels start you in the game's dungeons. But of course, this would cut the game's length significantly unless they made some more extensive changes. The game's story is well written, and although there are some issues that I'm going to go over, I really liked it. The story starts off in San Francisco on Avengers Day, or A-Day, a day designated to celebrate the Avengers. On this day, the Avengers are unveiling their new helicarrier, the Chimera, which is powered by a new form of energy, Terrigen. Along with the unveiling, S.H.I.E.L.D. is hosting an A-Day festival on board the helicarrier, and the Avengers are revealing the winner of a fan fiction comic book writing contest, with one of the fan writers being Kamala Khan, the character that you follow for most of the early levels of the game. During all these events, terrorists set off an explosion on the Golden Gate Bridge. Captain America stays behind on the Chimera while the rest of the team battles the terrorists. By the time that the Avengers realize that it was all a distraction so that the terrorists could sabotage the Chimera, it was too late. And Cap is on the helicarrier when it explodes, causing much of the city to be destroyed and thousands to die. There is also a subplot mentioned here about something in the San Francisco Bay beginning to pull the Chimera into the water using a type of energy manipulation.
I'm getting strange readings on the monitors, like we're being pulled to a heat signal in the bay.
But this is not mentioned again until the end of the game and, in my opinion, is never effectively explored. In the aftermath of A-Day, Terrigen begins causing people to develop powers. Also, government intervention shuts down S.H.I.E.L.D., turns over all Stark Industries' assets to a company known as Advanced Idea Mechanics, and forces the remaining Avengers into hiding. Kamala Khan is one of the Inhumans, as they are called, that has gained powers due to Terrigen. 5 years after the events of A-Day, she discovers a video file that may shed some light on what really happened on A-Day and the dark secrets surrounding the terrorist attack. She is immediately targeted by AIM due to this discovery and goes on the run. Kamala realizes that she must reunite the Avengers in order to unravel this mystery and, possibly, bring justice to those who were wronged during the Avengers Day incident. The problem with this game's story is not the story in itself, but the way in which it is told. If you have ever watched the movie Suicide Squad, you will know exactly what I am talking about when I tell you that the characters of this game are good, the plot is good, all the mechanics of the game are good, but there is something off about its execution. Just like in Suicide Squad, there are times when it feels rushed and as if scenes are missing. There probably should have been more cutscenes to fill in certain parts of the storytelling. To be clear, I don't mean that you miss pieces of the story, but instead there are moments when someone says something like, "Okay, Avengers, go get them," and then it cuts to you in the Quinjet flying towards your objective, when really what it should have done is show you walking onto the Quinjet, talking with your teammates, building camaraderie, and giving the characters more depth. For lack of a better word, I would say that the storytelling is less fluid and cinematic than it should be. This makes me wonder, just as with Suicide Squad, what kind of interference occurred behind the scenes that distracted the development team from making this game better. There are games that, when put together, become greater than the sum of their parts. This is just not one of those games. And what is sad is that behind-the-scenes production issues are probably what brought down the quality of this game. The creative teams behind the production of this game seem to have really had a passion for the project. Combat was excellent. The story was well thought out. And they do such a good job at portraying the characters. The issue really starts to show itself when you see how it's all put together and the generic feeling of some of the extra features in the game, including customization options. I give this game a rating of above average. And while some people will disagree with me and say that this game is very average or even below average, I would say that the solid writing of the story, the excellent combat, along with the multiplayer and the extended hours that you can get from the multiplayer, elevate this game above average. The bottom line for me really is that this game is actually fun to play. And there is something here for everyone. If you want to be a nimble striker, there's a hero for that. If you want to be a raging brute, there's a hero for that. And if you want to be a cosmic level being hurling bolts of lightning at your enemies, you can be that too. I'm actually very excited to see the different things that they bring to this game on the multiplayer side of things, especially because there's already new heroes that are in development. I hope that you enjoyed this review, and I hope that you enjoy this game even more. Hey everybody, thank you for watching. I really hope that you liked my review. I do want to clarify some things before I let you go. First of all, our rating system at Mike's After Action Reviews. So I use a tiered system instead of giving games a specific number. So we have bad games, below average games, above average games, and excellent games. So this is an above average game, but I want to make it very clear that this was really hard for me to review. I really did like the story and the combat of the game, but I do recognize that there are a lot of issues, like I talked about in the video, so I want to make it very clear that while I do recommend the game for most people, I will say that if you're a player who really only wants to play a good story and a good campaign and you have no interest in the post-campaign content, I would definitely say give this one a pass. The combat, if you're into post-campaign type stuff like Destiny and things like that, the combat is definitely worth it for you to play, and I definitely recommend it. But I can definitely say that I do understand how people who are really only into getting a good story and a good campaign, why they would not like this game. So I would say that. But I really appreciate you watching my video, and I wanted to make sure that I cleared that up because I understand how I was kind of going back and forth between the things I liked and the things I didn't like, and it can be a bit confusing. Basically, the game is really good, but I was still quite disappointed in some things. Please, if you like what you see, subscribe to the channel, give me a like, leave a comment, and what really helps is getting a share on the videos. I pay for advertising, and I'm a small channel. I have a day job. I'm just a guy trying to make it on YouTube, and no matter how much money I pay to different platforms to advertise for me, it's not as good as you, the viewer, going and telling your friends, hey, this is a good video, watch this video. So, anyway, I really appreciate it. God bless you all, and have a good day.